Japan just made a bold and shocking move. It canceled a key security meeting with the United States that was supposed to happen on July 1st. This is more than a minor disagreement. It's a sign that something very serious is breaking between two of the world's closest allies. At the heart of the issue is trust, and Japan has lost it. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba is under heavy pressure at home, especially with national elections coming up on July 20th. His government is angry and embarrassed. The Trump administration suddenly demanded that Japan raise its military spending, and it hit Japan with massive tariffs. 25% on cars and 24% on other exports. Even worse, Trump canceled the 2018 trade deal that his own team signed. For Tokyo, this felt like a betrayal. Now Japanese officials say it's too risky to be seen shaking hands with Trump's people. They fear that being too close to Washington could cost them the election. And more than that, they believe America is no longer a reliable partner. If Japan is pulling away, it puts the entire US strategy in Asia at risk. Countries such as China and North Korea are closely watching. If the US loses Japan, its whole defense system in the Pacific could fall apart. The US-Japan alliance has been strong since World War II, but right now it's on the edge of collapse. The damage is real, the trust is broken, and the consequences could shake global security. Hit that subscribe button and let's get into the full news story. For many years, Japan and the United States were close allies, especially when it came to security and defense in the Asia-Pacific region. But now something has gone very wrong. Prime Minister Ishiba, leader of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, LDP, is now avoiding US officials connected to Trump, not even posing for photos. In diplomacy, optics matter, and this sends a clear signal. Japan feels manipulated. The spark was trade. Trump's administration reversed the 2018 deal, leaving Japan humiliated. With national elections looming on July 20th, the ruling party fears looking weak on the US could cost them power. So the big question now is this: what happens when showing too much friendship to an ally becomes a political risk? For Japan, the answer is to step away, for now. The breaking point came when Japan canceled a very important meeting scheduled for July 1st. It was a 2+2 meeting, where the defense and foreign ministers of both countries usually meet to talk about military cooperation. These meetings are not just routine. They are meant to show that the alliance between Japan and the US is strong. But Japan canceled it. And that was a huge deal. The cancellation was not because Japan doesn't care about the alliance. It was because the Japanese government feared the political consequences of being seen too close to Trump's team just before the July 20th election. People in Japan are already angry about Trump's changing trade policies and sudden defense demands. The key issue was a new demand from the US that Japan increase its defense spending from 3% of its economy to 3.5%. That may sound small, but it would mean a huge jump in spending. The demand came from a high-ranking Pentagon official named Elbridge Colby. To the Japanese, it felt like bullying. They were not asked, they were told. And the timing, so close to an election, made it feel even more like pressure. Canceling the meeting was a bold move. It showed that Japan is willing to risk upsetting the US to protect its political future at home. But it also raised serious concerns. If Japan can't even sit down with its most important ally, what does that mean for the future of the alliance? Opposition politicians in Japan have started attacking the Trump administration openly. They have called Trump and his team felons and extortionists. And they're turning the US-Japan relationship into a political issue. This problem is not unique to Japan. Across the world, being too close to Trump has become a political liability. In Canada and Australia, conservative governments that aligned too closely with Trump's style and policies have already suffered defeats. Japanese politicians fear they could be next. That's why Japan is now doing everything it can to avoid being seen as too close to the Trump team. At the same time, this careful distancing could come at a cost. If Japan pulls too far away, the whole region could feel the impact. Without strong cooperation between the US and Japan, Who will counter threats from China, North Korea, or even Russia? Tokyo is trying to survive politically, but it may be risking its security in the process. At the center of this storm is Elbridge Colby. He's the third highest official at the Pentagon and a long-term critic of the way America handles its military alliances. Colby is not a quiet bureaucrat. He's a vocal strategist who has said he doesn't trust many of America's current military agreements. Colby caused a stir earlier when he said the U.S. might pull out of the AUKUS pact. This pact was meant to be a bold trilateral security alliance between the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia, but it is now under serious threat. According to reports from Politico, the U.S. is reviewing the entire deal, and not for better alignment or strategic updates. Instead, the reason is to make sure it fits Donald Trump's America First agenda. Colby is reportedly questioning the core of the pact, the U.S. sale of 3 Virginia-class nuclear submarines to Australia. These submarines were supposed to help Australia modernize its naval forces and push back against growing Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific. Now, Colby says the U.S. needs those subs for itself. If the review leads to delays or cancellations, the entire AUKUS agreement could unravel. Worse, it sends a dangerous signal that American commitments to allies are conditional and temporary, depending on who's in the White House. For countries already nervous about China's rise, this kind of uncertainty could be disastrous. America's edge in the Pacific depends not just on weapons, but on trust. If the U.S. can't deliver on a major submarine deal to one of its most loyal partners, what message does that send to Japan, South Korea, or even NATO? And now, Colby is the one pushing Japan to raise its defense budget sharply and suddenly. Japanese leaders were not prepared for this. They spent years carefully balancing their military spending with their constitution, which limits how much Japan can engage in warfare. The demand to raise defense spending to 3.5% of GDP felt like an ambush. No discussion, no agreement, just a demand. It was interpreted as a sign that the U.S. no longer values Japan's input. Instead, Tokyo feels like it's being treated like a junior partner expected to obey orders. If Colby is pushing Japan like this, and Australia is already worried about his attitude toward their alliance, then something bigger might be happening. America's entire Pacific defense network may be starting to fall apart. Let's go back to the canceled July 1st meeting. These 2+2 meetings are where key military plans are made. They cover things like joint drills, missile defense, and how to respond to sudden crises. Skipping the meeting isn't just bad politics. It could weaken real defense coordination. Japan and the U.S. rely on each other in case of emergencies. But with this meeting off the table, there could now be confusion or delays if something goes wrong, like a missile launch from North Korea or a naval clash with China. Without regular high-level coordination, those situations become harder to manage. The cancellation also sends a message to other countries. It tells China, North Korea, and even Russia that the US-Japan alliance isn't as strong as it looks. That could encourage them to take more risks. It also tells other US allies like South Korea and Australia that the US might be pushing too hard and respecting its partners too little. Japan is taking a big risk, canceling meetings, distancing from the US, and betting that its voters will reward it for standing up to Trump. But if things go wrong, Japan might find itself without strong backup in a very dangerous region. There's another warning coming from inside America's political world. Rahm Emanuel, a former White House chief of staff and now a top diplomat, has said something very troubling. He says that Trump's team doesn't care whether a deal actually helps the US. They just want it to look good on TV and want praise with flatteries.
Early in the administration, that if you wanted to come see the president, you had to praise him publicly, you had to thank him publicly.
According to Emanuel, Trump's style of diplomacy is all about appearance, not substance. Foreign leaders are starting to notice. Japan, in particular, is playing it smart. They're slowing things down, avoiding firm promises, and betting that Trump's impatience will cause him to move on without pressing too hard. In other words, they're using Trump's weaknesses against him. This shows a very dangerous game. America's allies are no longer working with the US because they trust it. They're trying to outmaneuver it. They see the alliance not as a strong partnership, but as a stage for political theater. This could hurt US power and reputation all around the world. So where do we go from here? The first big moment is the Japanese election on July 20th. If the ruling party loses badly, Japan may go in a new direction. A new leader might try to create distance from the US, or even look for new deals with countries like China or South Korea. The second concern is a real military crisis. If North Korea launches a missile or China makes a dangerous move at sea, the US and Japan might not be fully ready. The breakdown in communication caused by canceling meetings could have real-world consequences. The third danger is global. China is watching all of this. If they think America is losing its grip on its allies, they might get bolder. They could test limits around Taiwan or the disputed islands near Japan. And if Japan doesn't feel confident in its alliance with the US, it might hesitate to act. The alliance can still be saved, but only if both sides change course. Japan wants to be treated with respect. It doesn't want to be ordered around. The US, on the other hand, wants Japan to help more with defense, especially against China. To fix things, the US should stop making sudden demands and start offering real incentives, like sharing military technology or increasing joint training. Japan should come back to the table after the election and be ready to negotiate. But if the ruling party loses and a new government takes over, all bets are off. Meanwhile, China is not standing by idly. In the wake of Trump's steep 2025 tariffs on Japanese goods, 25% on cars, 24% on key exports, China is wasting no time stepping into the gap. As US-Japan relations sour, Beijing is actively reaching out to Tokyo with offers of deeper trade, investment, and regional cooperation. In April and May, Chinese officials quietly opened back-channel talks with Japanese and South Korea trade envoys. By June, Vice Premier Liu He had publicly proposed a bilateral stability pact for Asian trade, emphasizing cooperation in supply chains, digital infrastructure, and green tech. These discussions have moved fast. Multiple Japanese firms, especially those in electronics and manufacturing, have reportedly begun exploring Chinese alternatives to US suppliers and export routes. Beijing is offering incentives that Washington can no longer match, including lower tariffs, long-term infrastructure investments, and even partial access to China's domestic market for Japanese automakers. More shockingly, China has floated the idea of strategic maritime coordination, an unthinkable move a year ago, suggesting joint port infrastructure projects in Southeast Asia. The motive is clear. China sees an opening to weaken the US-Japan alliance by building economic dependency. And Japan, bruised by Washington's trade hostility and diplomatic chaos, is more open than ever before to diversifying away from American reliance. This doesn't mean Japan is switching sides, but it's clearly hedging its bets. And if the US keeps pushing allies away with economic aggression and unpredictable diplomacy, China won't have to fight for influence. It'll simply step in and take it. So if you want to stay ahead as US alliances crack and new powers rise, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell.